into the Zoom room, we will get started momentarily. Good morning. My name is Ken Levinson, and I'm the Executive Director of WITA. Thank you for joining us for this second event in our mini series of events looking at trade and gender. This is also the second event in our larger series on worker-centric and inclusive trade. You may not know it from where you're sitting today, but today marks an important milestone for the WITA community. It was 1 year ago today, March 26, 2020, that we held our first fully online event. Since then, and including today, we've hosted 75 webinar panels with guests from across the US and around the world. Thank you all for your incredible support these past 12 months. As I've mentioned it before, we'll continue fully online through the summer, but hope to begin hosting live in-person events in the fall, if it's safe then to do so. We'll continue to stream our events and continue to host online events with speakers from around the world, even once we are back with live in-person events. We do have a robust series of events coming up at WITA. Next Thursday, April 1st, we're partnering with Women in International Trade for an event on medical supply chains and the President Biden's executive order on supply chains. The following week, April 8th, we'll continue our discussion of worker-centric and inclusive trade by going back to the basics and trying to answer the question of why do we trade and who should benefit from it. We have an all-star panel for that discussion. We'll be following up on that with discussions of US-EU trade on April 13th, trade, immigration in Central America on April 14th, and a big event in our Trade and Environment series to celebrate Earth Day a couple days early on April 20th. Information on all the upcoming events is available on our website, www.wita.org, and at the bottom of the event program we emailed around this morning. If you've been to a WITA webinar before, you know that we like to call out the names of some of those you're in community with. So today we'd like to welcome Michaela Chen of Boston Scientific, Bjorn Arvidsson from the Embassy of Sweden, Caitlin Hamill from New Balance, and Ambassador Susan Esserman of Steptoe & Johnson. Welcome, Michaela, Bjorn, Caitlin, and Susan, and welcome again to all of you. If you're watching this on Zoom, you can ask questions of our panelists using the Q&A tab on Zoom. We'll try to get to as many of those as we can toward the end of our session. You should have also received the biographies of our terrific panel discussing gender and inclusive trade. So today we'd like to welcome Mei Xu, the CEO of Yes, She May, and author of the book Burn, about her journey from immigrant to successful entrepreneur. Beth Roberts, the director of Landesa Center for Women's Lands Rights. Livia Shmavonian, who's been a leading voice for women in her role as a senior advisor to US Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania. Elvis Francis, who helped develop GAP's P.A.C.E program and is coming to us from New Delhi, our first speaker on our Zoom webinar platform from India. Welcome, Elvis. And welcome to my good friend, Nicole Bivens Collinson, president of the International Trade and Government Relations practice at Sandler, Travis, and Rosenberg, and a former president of Women in International Trade. Welcome, May, Beth, Livia, Elvis, and Nicole. Nicole?
Thanks, Ken. You know, the one-year anniversaries are something that normally you celebrate, and you know, it's your first anniversary, congratulations. I'm not sure if that's what we want to celebrate, but congratulations on keeping WITA alive, making sure that we have had incredible programs. So my hat's off, and I think everyone else should also recognize and thank Ken and Diego for a phenomenal job they've done in keeping us going this past year. So hats off to you. So we're going to continue, as Ken said, moving on to our second in this mini series. And as you recall, last week we did a program that focused on the opportunities for engagement on trade and gender. And we're going to take now and we're going to funnel down further, because last week's program, we looked at some of the multinationals organizations like the ITC in Geneva. We looked at the World Bank, IFC. We looked at plurilateral actions, speaking with Canada on the USMCA, speaking with a minister from Chile on the Pacific Alliance. So seeing what they were doing in their agreements and in their actions to try and bring the gender issue into their practices and how they're building on that. This week, we're going to try to continue going down that funnel, because I don't know if you recall, and if you don't, you're learning for the first time, that at the end of this session, Laura Lane, who was the moderator, had asked each of the panelists, what are actions? Okay, now we've got these great platforms, we've got policies and procedures and statements in place, but what are actions we can do? And it was interesting when we listened to that, they said there really were four, each panelist gave an action item. And one of them, the first one was access to networks, talking about helping women in genders get involved in trade was having access to the networks. A second was access to financing, and financing can also be wealth. Wealth is property. Third was national leadership and making sure that each of the nations individually have this leadership position. So it's from the top down as well. And then fourth was partnership with the private sector. Today, we have panelists from each of those that are really going to demonstrate how we can take meaningful actions to barriers to trade for women. So our first panelist, she can really speak to this issue of access to networks. As you hopefully have read her biography, Mei Xu is going to talk to us about her own amazing story, as Ken alluded to, from immigrant to incredibly successful businesswoman to now starting and lifting up other women, letting them stand on her shoulders, as she was so blessed to be able to be successful in this country and amplifying their networks. So Mei, if you wouldn't mind, we'd love to hear the story about what you're doing, how you got to where you are, and what you're doing to show meaningful actions to lifting barriers to women in trade.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Nicole. One of the interesting time I feel is obviously always in the springtime when we are here to celebrate women. And when everybody celebrate women once a year, I'm always hoping that they would remember, as half of the population, we really do need to focus on them every day of the week. And that is what Yeshime is about. So let me give you a little bit background. As Nicole mentioned, I was trained as a diplomat growing up in China, and I didn't end up being a diplomat, but my language education prepared me working for the World Bank in China when they started investing there in the 1980s. When I pursued my graduate degree here in Maryland with the hope to graduate and work for the bank eventually, that didn't work out either, which shows that most of our lives has its own way to zigs and zags. I ended up finding a pretty boring job, I would say, in New York. And from there, I got inspired with the beautiful fashion world and see a gap between what I would call a discrepancy between home product and fashion product. As a result of that, I started a business in 1994, focused on doing business with China. As you can imagine, 1990s are probably the golden era in the sense of export from China. But rather than becoming a trader, I actually realized that I need to be more innovative and I need to be more focused on manufacturing that is more value added than just beating other competitors on price. So I started a brand inspired by where I was living, Chesapeake Bay, and it's called Chesapeake Bay Candle. So 20 some years later, I built 3 factories, one in China, one in Vietnam, and one actually in Baltimore, Maryland, which was the first factory being built in 3 decades. So all the experiences building different supply chains around the world, working with some of the biggest and successful retailers, such as Target, such as Kohl's and Bloomingdale's, gave me a very unusual platform, I would say, for women. One that not only connect me to a great marketplace, but also urges me to use innovation every step of the way and combine that with meaningful, thoughtful manufacturing. Fortunate for me, candle manufacturing has never left this country. We have a very big supply chain that has never left. It starts with refineries, such as the ones in Texas, where they refine oil and, obviously petroleum oil. But increasingly, as the demand for more sustainable raw material rise, now we have refined soil wax, which is amazing to use, and it's obviously much more sustainable. At the same time, we have very nice around New Jersey and New York area, a very big fine fragrance and food flavor industry, which is one of the most dominant in the world. And then obviously you have the Yankee Candles of the world where they do very big bulk production. So it's never left this country. And that is how I was able to bring manufacturing back. Long story short, in 2017, I sold the business to Newell Brands. It's one of the largest conglomerate that holds probably 50 of the household brands that you and I use every day, so that I feel my brand, which is a baby like my children, have to graduate, to go to college. Now they can go and see how the world is going to be, along with other portfolio brands. And at that time, I realized, and I was invited always to talk to women businesses, that I was the exception. I was not the rule when it's about women-owned business. Most of their businesses are so small. It's somewhere between $100,000 to $200,000. It's an exception when they go to $1 million, and it's truly very rare that they go through 10 million, particularly in the consumer product area. So Nicole, you mentioned access to capital, access to market. And let's not forget, because they are also consumer production related, they have a big hurdle with manufacturing and logistics. So the access to that sort of where you really can see the scale, they do not really have. So I was starting to giving them advice. My thought was, why not let me work with them so that I can push them to be able to work and partner with big companies the way I did. And I talked to probably 300 women-owned businesses. A lot of them are based in South Korea, Italy, where my husband is from. I already realized that there are definitely very different skill set in different countries. We were talking about some regions are more successful in fashion, some regions are more successful in home goods. So while I was doing this discovery process in 2019, I met a lot of women, and then came the pandemic in 2020. Instead of being able to help them to grow, that time was more about how do we stop the bleeding and the closures, because a lot of them, you can imagine, they're not working with Target, they're not working with Amazon, they're working with the mom and pop corner stores, a lot of which are in the touristy place, right? The souvenir shops in Peru, or the gift stores in the airport. So when travel come to a halt, you can imagine people immediately cancel their deliveries and they say, we're not really able to buy your product. That's when I decided, this is a question Nicole actually want me to talk about. How did you actually start a business during the pandemic? I didn't really, it started already. I was doing consulting. So rather than being on the back end, I put myself forward. We spent about 3 months working with software engineers so that we are able to build a website facing consumers in June of 2020, with the goal of showcasing brands that are around the world. Most of the time, not just showing product like Amazon. I always feel Amazon is definitely designed and for men, because it's very much like a file cabinet. You have a photo, you have a price. And then everybody put your photo up and there's no face. There's no story about who's putting this up and who's putting that up. So it kind of trains the consumer to be a price comparison shopper. So what we want to do is to take the narrative of our women and put them forefront. My view is that consumers actually are longing for that connection. They are longing. I mean, I mean, Nicole, you can tell me how many things you really do need to buy, right? Everyone here. Olivia, is there anything you must buy by Monday? Maybe some toilet papers, but a scarf, honestly, I don't have to buy, or earrings, I don't need to buy, particularly, right now. But if you see someone and you hear that story, we have a group called Mothers in Action from Peru, as you can imagine. Mothers in Action is started by a woman from Holland. She saw the beautiful, walls that produced in that part of the world, but they always make it very colorful. Bright green, bright red. You loved it when you are there. The alpaca wool. But when you bring it home, it doesn't fit your closet. You look like a souvenir yourself. So she went there and started this workshop called Mothers in Action, so that she gave them a color story. She tell them, you weave this way. This is the sizes that most Western women would fit. And it's a remarkable transformation when you see all these touristy looking product to where it is today. Very sophisticated, have a wide range of sizes, has a sense of seasonality, so it's not always very thick. When I worked with them, she told a story about how she was able to give mother who's raising children a chance, because in Peru, in the mountains, the kids don't obviously have daycare, and there are many of them in each family. So when they're a little bit younger, what do? You can't hold them. So they put them in that bag, they swindle them in the bag, and they can do their sweater, and they can make a living at home. So this is where I see the hope, is how women can be organized. But someone like this founder from Europe, that with her eyes and with her ability, we can mobilize the kind of productivity that we didn't know existed. And it's one woman. We have now 80 brands, I would say, and a lot of the brands were not like the brands called Mothers in Action. A lot of brands are more designer driven, because my goal is to elevate their brands so that consumers at home would be able to access them, not only when they go to Peru in the Machu Picchu area, but really give them that shared platform where their companion brands are also very much the model of success, so they can breed success on top of each other.
Great. I think that's phenomenal. The part of it is the access. And like you say, during the middle of a pandemic, how can you help women? You can go through the internet, because everyone is changing. I mean, I did some studies on this, and prior to the pandemic, 84% of all shopping transactions took place in a physical store. By October of last year, it was 64% of all transactions taking place online. So taking that initiative, linking these women, giving them access, I think is phenomenal. So that's a great positive forward action step, and we really appreciate it and look forward to it. And tell us again the name of it.
The platform is called Yes, She May. We want every woman to feel in a sense that they may pursue their dreams, and they may be able to meet a much bigger audience. I do have to say, if you allow me 1 minute, Nicole, I basically did this without, it's not a nonprofit for that reason. I can't imagine. I spent about $2 million since the beginning, because I know that a great infrastructure is very much the name of the game. What you're saying is the change between bricks to clicks, right? The bricks to clicks, the transformation that happened in the last year in retail would have taken us 10 years to happen. So imagine that, 10 years. And you don't have a lot of software platform that can support what I would call multi-vendor platform, which means everybody probably by now heard the Canadian company Shopify. What Shopify has done over the last year is they help every brand like a Nike, but that's a big brand, let's say a small brand, to go from wholesale to retail. So it's called direct to consumer model. Shopify is a great tool when you have one brand and you go from only selling to wholesale to meet consumers. Imagine I need to carry 80 brands and more. And that is where the technology doesn't exist, I have to say. And it's usually enterprise. So you have Amazon, obviously, it's the golden standard. And there are many, many big companies. So I would say that's where it's very difficult, because women also have a very big obstacle in technology platform. And when I mentioned one last thing, that's how I know UPS. I attacked them first. I went to see them. I said, my ladies cannot compete with Amazon's next day shipping. There is no way. It is 100% more when they get their rate compared with UPS. So let's make sure we give them some incentive, some discount. When holidays come, they can at least give a little bit, help to the consumers. This is, it's still a very big problem for us. I'm not going to be shy. We will have to go through this one process at a time.
Well, that's great. And I know that there's some participants listening who may be able to help you out in that. So thank you again so much. The next action item that we were talking about is the access to financing. And sometimes land translates into wealth and to money. So I think it's really good that we have our next panelist, Beth Roberts, who's the director of the Center for Women's Land Rights, Landesa. And she's going to tell us a little bit about what they're doing and how they're making some positive changes and breaking down barriers for women. Beth?
Thank you so much, Nicole. And thank you to WITA for this opportunity. So I'll first introduce Landesa. We are an international land rights organization, and we work at the global, national, and local levels to secure legal rights to land for the approximately 2.5 billion people worldwide who depend on land for a living. Our mission is to end poverty, create inclusive opportunity, and empower women and girls. We've worked primarily with governments to improve law and policy and implementation related to land, and have also worked extensively with international bodies, with corporations, and with civil society partners. So that 2.5 billion is approximately 1.25 million women and girls, about 1/6 of the global population. So what are the barriers to trade for this huge category of women? So the first barrier is poverty and all of its accompanying limitations with regard to access to markets. These rural and indigenous communities are home to 80% of those still experiencing poverty, according to the World Bank's 2020 Global Poverty Report. And women within these communities experience poverty more acutely. They are more likely to be hungry and less likely to be educated than their male counterparts. Social norms also deeply constrain women from accessing supply chains. In India and Myanmar, two countries where Landesa currently works, the word for farmer is male. This is symbolic of the depth to which women are relegated to care roles and barred from market-facing and public-facing activities. This is true even when they do the bulk of agricultural labor on commercial crops. For example, in cocoa growing regions of Ghana, women process, dry, and bag cocoa beans, but men are the ones who transport the beans to the point of sale. And men are far more often the recipients of government and private sector trainings, supports, and incentives provided to cocoa farmers. And at the national level, in most low and middle income countries, women are severely underrepresented in arenas where decisions governing land and natural resources are made. Ministries of Trade and Trade and Investment, finance and planning, and land administration are overwhelmingly male dominated. This can be even more true at the subnational level, where programs to engage rural women in supply chains need to be implemented. So what can corporate actors and trade experts do about these barriers? So I'll turn now to strategies to overcome them. And we've actually found that companies can be very effective in supporting women to access land and to leverage that land to build their income and to gain access to supply chains. I'll give just one example from India, where Landesa is part of a partnership between USAID and P.A.C.E to demonstrate how women's empowerment can support sustainable farming practices and result in improved potato yields and net profitability for rural farmers, which positively impacts P.A.C.E's bottom line. And here we found that companies have the power, or it was reaffirmed for us that companies have incredible power to shift gender dynamics at the local level and to include women in supply chains. So we supported women's groups in the state of West Bengal to lease land so that they can grow potatoes for Pepsi. And we were also able to train the agronomists on the project about barriers to women's participation and access for women to owning and controlling land, as well as work with women and men within communities to identify and shift the norms that were limiting women from being employed outside the home and from even viewing themselves as being capable of farming. After one growing season, the women's group's productivity rivaled men's, and they are now running a model farm to showcase best farming practices. And this was all possible because Pepsi was invested in women's empowerment. So finally, while I suspect that no one attending this panel needs to be convinced, I want to lay out the argument for why we should invest in trade policies that benefit rural women. So I'll give a quick and breathtakingly generalized macro level picture of how promoting legal recognition for rights for those 2.5 billion rural and indigenous people and women within those communities is good trade practice. Those 2.5 billion people manage approximately 65% of the world's land and manage 80% of the planet's remaining biodiversity. But only 10% of that land is legally recognized by governments as belonging to rural people. Rural women within these communities are an untapped labor market. And many crops that are high demand, cocoa being an example again here, are labor intensive and still beyond mechanization for the most part. One approach to rural land globally has been to push a shift toward commercial agriculture or to enclose areas for conservation of biodiversity, carbon sequestration, and carbon trading. A recent study from the Rights and Resources Initiative shows that the work to recognize rights for these rural communities, which would enable them to meaningfully engage in land use decisions and natural resource markets, is 1% of the cost of relocating those communities to impose top-down or outside control of those lands. It's worth remembering that in the US, the shift from agriculture to industry to services took over a century. Agricultural development is one of the most powerful tools to move countries out of poverty, and it's a powerful tool to feed the projected 9.7 billion people that will be on the planet by 2050. So to ensure peace and security, stable and gender equal societies, and strong enabling environments for investment globally, our trade policies should promote recognition of land rights and a gradual move out of agriculture, and should promote intensive and extensive investments in rural areas to support economic empowerment for rural women and for men, to engage in the fight against the climate emergency and to preserve biodiversity. I'll wrap up my remarks there. I'll save my action items for the end, Nicole. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. And as you and I discussed, I have a real interest in a lot of what you're doing because my daughter is studying natural resources, soil science, and sustainable agriculture at the University of Florida. And she's hoping to help get some of these issues addressed about our food shortages and the population, just as you said. So getting the globe involved is going to be critical. Our next action item is the national leadership. And we have people who talk about the idea we have to have women involved in trade, we have to have women involved in businesses. And there are some people who actually, walk the walk. And I think Livia Shmavonian, who's in Senator Casey's office, she and her boss have been taking some actions, not only in Pennsylvania, but also on a national level. So Livia, if you can share with us, what are some of the things that you guys are doing, some actions, meaningful actions to help lift some of those barriers?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. Appreciate that. And as a graduate of UC Davis, which is California's land-grant university, big fan of the soil sciences. Thanks for having me. And I hope to build off the previous discussion and pull the aperture back a little bit. So we've talked about the business enterprise level. We've talked about the organizational level and kind of what we're seeing on the ground and how organizations can work with governments in coordination and businesses in coordination to improve conditions on the ground. And I'm going to speak to kind of the broader challenges that we're seeing with respect to women's rights and economic empowerment globally and what we're proposing to do about it at the government level. So according to the United Nations, more than 2.5 billion women and girls live in countries with laws that discriminate against them. These laws restrict women's rights to own property, as Beth discussed, the right to open a bank account, equal access to education, inheritance, the right to divorce, the right to child custody, and restrictions related to getting a job or starting a business, among others. The right to equal protection under law, regardless of gender, is a fundamental human right. But women's rights and economic empowerment is not simply a matter of human rights. It's a matter of equity, it's a matter of economics, and it is also a matter of global security. And we see the consequences of this discrimination. Nearly 500 million women and girls are illiterate, and only 39% of girls living in rural areas attend secondary school. In many respects, this means women lose the game before they even start to play, which is, as we said, a matter of human rights, a matter of equity, but it's also a matter of economics. The IMF estimates that closing the gender gap could increase global GDP by 35% on average. McKinsey estimates that fully incorporating women into the global economy could add $12 trillion. And all of this is before we get into the issues we also see in more developed countries, such as access to credit for women-owned businesses, which I will note is also an issue right here in the United States. Women's rights and economic empowerment, as I've said, is a matter of human rights, it's a matter of equity, it's a matter of economics, and it's also a matter of global security. Dr. Valerie Hudson and Dr. Rose McDermott, who are professors at Texas A&M and Brown University, have done really impressive and groundbreaking research on the impact of gender discrimination on peace and security and extremism. Dr. Hudson's research includes analysis of comprehensive empirical data on the status of women around the world. Her work shows that when women are empowered, nations have greater levels of security and prosperity. When women's rights are discriminated against, when women are discriminated against, such as denial of property, inheritance rights, rights in marriage and divorce, and the degree to which women experience violence in society, countries experience greater levels of conflict and corruption. Dr. Hudson documents how discrimination against women has significant negative consequences on society, with worse outcomes among conflict, stability, economic performance, governance, and food security, among other measures. The advancement of women's rights, in my view, is not something countries should need incentives to do. It is fundamental to their own long-term security, stability, and economic prosperity. Not to mention, it is a matter of fundamental fairness and human rights, but action must be taken. So what are we going to do about it? We clearly have firms taking action, but the systemic nature of the challenges cannot be resolved absent a coordinated strategy within the United States and globally. Fundamentally, it should be the policy of the United States in every avenue to promote equal protection under law, regardless of gender, which is why we were thrilled to see USTR include women's rights and economic empowerment as part of the president's trade agenda this year, and trade being recognized in several EOs related to women's rights and economic empowerment. Last year, Senator Casey and Senator Cortez Masto put forward a comprehensive proposal with respect to how the United States can incorporate women's rights across US trade law. They have an opinion piece in the Council on Foreign Relations, and I encourage you to take a look if you aren't already familiar. Their approach with respect to our development programs cuts to the heart of the issue, which is to document and address the laws that are in place that discriminate against women in every aspect of their lives, not simply in the workplace. Their proposal builds off the work done at the World Bank and the Women, Business, and Law Report, which has over 10 years of longitudinal data on country-level progress, or lack thereof, on overturning discriminatory laws. This approach is also central to the one being undertaken at the UN. These are the kinds of laws I discussed earlier: denial of the right to own property, to open a bank account, inheritance, to divorce, child custody, rights related to employment, or starting a business. We need strong labor laws. We need strong laws against violence and harassment, against discrimination, on equal pay for equal work. But it is not simply a matter of getting women into the workplace unless we also address the fundamental barriers to women's economic participation. If we don't do that, we're not going to see the level of progress needed to reach the 35% GDP growth, $15 trillion. If we don't address the laws that discriminate against women and girls in the home, in family law, women are set behind before they even get started. And addressing this type of discrimination is what we're endeavoring to do. So, thank you.
Great. Well, I know that you care very much about this, and your boss does as well. And so we really appreciate, the continued focus on this issue, because it's not just a woman's issue, it's a national issue, it's a global issue. And so having that continued focus is really appreciated. But again, I think each of you have also brought up the fourth element that we came out of our last program, which is this partnership with the private sector. And I think that we've got a great opportunity here to hear from Francis, who's the director of the GAP Foundation's P.A.C.E program. And it's the Personal Advancement and Career Enhancement program that was created to support women in the global apparel industry. So Elvis, I'm so glad that you're able to join us. If you can please tell us a little bit about the P.A.C.E program and what you're doing and the results you're seeing.
Thanks, Nicole. So as we all said, women play a major role in the global economy. They invest more in their families than men do in areas such as education, health, and nutrition, creating a secure foundation for the future of the families and communities. So empowering women economically, especially through the involvement in trade, create job opportunities for everyone. We agree with Livia's comments that women's economic empowerment is a matter of human rights, equity, and international security. As one of the biggest employers of low-skilled women workers, and with over 40 million women workers, the garment industry holds great power and potential to positively impact the lives of millions of women in low-income countries, and by extension, their families and communities. It is perhaps the only organized industry where one can get employment without any formal educational qualification. And we find most female garment workers with low level of literacy and skills in the industry. Often, most of these women join the workforce to supplement their family income and to support the financial well-being of their families. With low literacy levels and low skills and burdened by socialization and gender roles and responsibilities, garment workers are probably still at the first rung of the base of the pyramid. He has mobility, but lacks financial and economic independence and access to opportunities. Gapping has placed a priority on changing that. So, with nearly 80% of garment workers as women, and yet they do not have the same opportunities for advancement, including training and education, as men in the same sector. So we recognize this inequality in the supply chains and decided to take action because we believe that all women deserve the opportunity to reach their full potential. To support advancement of women workers, GAP launched the Personal Advancement and Career Enhancement Program in 2007. And P.A.C.E aims to educate and empower women workers by providing them with the life skills and agency to support the opportunities to advance their careers in the garment sector. The module-based program was conceptualized based on the needs that women express to help manage their roles and responsibilities, to help give wings to their aspirations, not just for themselves, but also for the children. The program since then has scaled to over 17 countries in multiple workplace, academia, and community settings. Over 800,000 women and girls have completed the P.A.C.E program, and we are on track to achieve our ambitious goal of reaching 1 million individuals by 2022. The systemic challenges that women face also created barriers for her growth. The program attempted to amplify their voice through the empowerment process. Life skills programs like P.A.C.E that focuses also on enhancing technical skills helps to improve worker retention, efficiency, and productivity and create a shared value approach. According to the World Bank's Women, Business and the Law 2018 report, it outlines 7 ways in which national laws can impede women's work. The P.A.C.E program aims to address many of these issues. Accessing institutions, when women cannot independently decide where they want to go on a daily basis, travel or live, they may face difficulty getting to work or conducting business transactions. Within the P.A.C.E program, through communication, problem solving, and decision making, Participants learn to have improved conversations at home with family members and in the community. Through assertive communication skills, young women have been able to take up jobs, migrate to cities, and start their own entrepreneurial skills. When women face constraints, including discrimination and limited credit history in accessing credit, the ability to start and grow businesses is impeded. In P.A.C.E, through financial literacy and digital finance learning modules, women have improved their knowledge about savings and have opened bank accounts that helps them manage their finances and improve savings. The financial inclusion also gives them access to credit and other services to be financially independent and save for the future aspirations. Barriers that affect women's ability to work inhibit their job prospects, earning potential, career growth, and ability to balance work and family. Through the program, through the time and stress management module, the women learn goal setting, task prioritization, and delegation skills that allow them to better manage their work-life responsibilities. Through modules like health and well-being, they learn to improve material and child health and nutrition. The social entitlement module gives them the information about state-sponsored schemes and incentives. Our vocational school programs also link technical training skills that gains them employability. Access to legal system allows, or the barriers to access to legal system allows women to advocate for the interests and enforce law. Through the legal literacy module, which is conducted with the help of experts, the sessions focus on the relevant laws that are country and state specific to protect women's rights. The learning sessions help them to learn more about the rights as a citizen and get professional advice from experts for the legal problems, including sexual harassment, domestic violence, property rights, and child custody. And then from protecting women from violence. The P.A.C.E program, learning content around safety and security is integrated across the module. So the content focuses on how to leverage key learnings across curriculums to ensure one's safety at home, during transit, and at the workplace. Safety and security is also extended to financial safety by planning their income and expenses to make future goals risk averse. And providing incentives at work. How can we support for mothers, etc. So within P.A.C.E life skills, the difference between sex and gender makes women understand that most differences are imposed by society and are not biological. Attitudes towards women engaging in gainful employment are clearly related to this. So this has helped the women to take up careers seriously and get some personal time by redistribution of roles. When women learn goal setting and apply it not just for the family, but for career, education, finance, and social affairs, the outlook broadens, and through effective decision making and assertive communication, they're able to seek support, collaborate, and influence family members and colleagues to cooperate with them for reaching their goals. And finally, control of land or housing can provide direct economic benefits to women entrepreneurs. So access to property can both increase women's financial security and provide them with necessary collateral to start businesses. So with P.A.C.E, the legal literacy module does speak about property rights, and as a result, several women who have taken steps to ask for and obtain rights over property. Social entitlement modules focus on several schemes by the government, some of which are linked to women having ownership to land if they are able to apply for housing schemes, etc. So overall, what we are seeing is that we are able to give a voice and create a trigger on their aspirations and then set them for their success and to the course forward. Thank you.
Well, Elvis, I think some amazing work that your foundation is doing. I think the fact that you've already reached 800,000 women in 17 different countries and you're on pace to get 1 million in the next couple of years is phenomenal. And I think there are going to be advancements. I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly who said it, but you empower women, you empower a nation. The fact that women do take priority of making sure that they have food for their children, that they have a roof over their head. If they can educate their children, they will do so. And they're not going to go spend their money having a nice drink at the local bar. Not to generalize too much, but we found that is some of the differences that we see. So I'd like to take the moderator's prerogative here and ask some individual questions. And first, I'd like to ask a question of you, Mei Xu. And it's, how do you believe that private enterprise can drive the demand for goods made by women on a global level? And to what extent do you think that demand can effectuate change within the societies that do not promote women businesses?
Well, I'm very fortunately in the consumer product business as Elvis is also, and we talked about the tremendous amount of garment industry that come from all these developing countries, which has a various amount of laws or traditions against women's rights. So if you think about big retailers like Gap or Walmart, Nike, and Target, the demand from consumers is pretty much what drive a lot of their practices. So in a way, for women in those countries, being able to have a steady job and then being able to have dependable income, not one season you have higher income, another you don't. I do think it's transformational. When I was investing in China in the early 90s, we hired around 3,000 workers. None of them were citizens from the city. They all migrate from the poor regions of China. And most of them has no more than middle school graduate degree. So they would go, work in the farm, and now they have a job. So first of all, I remember one of my product development team, he has a high school background, but he absolutely has no English background. And from the moment he started making samples, he has to read documentations somewhat in English along with the translations. And 10 years later, he is now she is now the leader for product manager. And she's able to communicate in English about not every context, but within the context of product development, sample shipping time, she's fluent. So within one generation, in 10 years, she was able to grow her income. She had married someone in the factory. She got a baby. She brought her brothers to come. So the whole family become educated and brought to this middle class lifestyle. So I do feel, and we're talking about candles, right? We're not even talking about a much bigger industry, which is the garment industry. Similar things were happening in Vietnam when we went to Haiphong as one of the first American investment in that part of the country where they just opened. So there are shoe manufacturers, there are toy manufacturers, and all these are private sectors that consumers can directly decide who they work with and how they want those to help lift the most vulnerable population and give them that growth within their economic situation. So I'm absolutely 100% positive that in my lifetime, in my experiences, we see that happen in a lot of areas we worked in.
Great, and I think that that's an important note, is that letting some of these private brands, really focus and also find those women businesses and women-owned business, I think is going to be essential, and it will make a difference. I know that there are many of the WITA members, corporations who have undertaken this type of exercise, specifically focusing on women and ensuring that they are purchasing some of the consumer goods from women. So I'm seeing some questions coming in, and I'm going to try to incorporate those into my questions as well. And I think I'm going to go to you, Beth, next. And you really have, your organization has really been focusing not only on women, but also on the poor. And one of the things is that you've been able to work with governments to adjust their policies and sometimes their laws on land ownership. And what do you think is sort of the next step on that? And do you think that incorporating these concepts in free trade agreements, to what extent do you think that's going to help advance the principle of gender land ownership or lead to increased participation in trade? So how do you feel like you can take what you've started, and can you move that into a trade agreement? And to what extent do you think that's going to help in this area?
Sure. So land ownership is really fundamental to economic investment and to economic opportunity. So I think most of us take that for granted, that if we have a lease on an apartment or a lease on a commercial building, that those rights are protected. That's not the case for the 2.5 billion people I was talking about. And Livia listed out really, really well, like the aspects of law where women are discriminated against. So inheritance, just the ability to access and own land in a variety of settings, and rights under divorce are really key as well. So Landesa has worked for over 50 years with governments to reform those kinds of laws, to make land reform more equitable for people living in rural areas, to set up that economic ability for economic advancement. Women have often been left out of land reform efforts, and simply because land has been allocated to households, land has been seen as a male purview. So including specific language about land rights, and in particular women's land ownership in trade agreements, could be a really incredible way to set that foundation for economic development and to promote and really further gender equality, excuse me. So, and then the next step for us is really implementation. There's still a long way to go in terms of reform of laws and policies, but working with governments to set up infrastructure so that those laws are actually have teeth at the local level. And so there's access to justice, access to accountability for women and for rural people.
Great, I agree with you. I think, I think we may see that, as was pointed out previously, that Ambassador Tai is looking at some of these gender and women's issues in relating them to trade and what we're doing. So hopefully we're going to see some of that moving forward. Again, I'd like to kind of incorporate a question that I have with some of the questions that have come in, and I would like this one to go to you, Livia. One of the things that you, as you mentioned, your boss has really been involved in all of these issues, whether it's access to paid family leave or ending discrimination against pregnant women, all of those issues. But what do you think are the steps or type of support that Congress can offer to assist in taking advantage of our trade agreements? And can you also talk about some of the specific women-owned business support efforts that your boss has taken during the pandemic?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. So the GAO put out a report late last year on GSP and women's rights and economic empowerment. And we have a second report that they're doing with respect to trade agreements. So something that we're hoping that they're able to look at is how U.S. women-owned businesses are able to benefit from current trade agreements. We don't have a lot of great data on that. And there are a number of challenges with respect to women, as Mei laid out, right? Women-owned businesses tend to be smaller, they tend to be less capitalized, they tend to be more services focused as opposed to manufacturing focused. And all of those things play into whether or not they can take advantage of trade agreements that we've negotiated. We also have the challenge with respect to defeminization of workforces, and that happens across the spectrum with respect to countries, right? So as jobs become more desirable, as people are paid more in those positions, women tend to get pushed out and men take those jobs. And so understanding at the outset what those consequences and ramifications might be, and really doing analysis at the start to understand what the gendered impacts of trade may be, because as we are coming to realize, trade isn't gender neutral, and we need to understand how that interacts. In terms of work during the pandemic, Senator P.A.C.E. was laser focused on the PPP loans and ensuring that smaller firms had access to those PPP loans that disproportionately benefited women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, small businesses, and businesses that do not bank with the traditional big banks, right? We made sure that other institutions, CDFIs, and the like were able to issue PPP loans, because those tend to be the institutions that smaller businesses, women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses utilize.
Great, and it's always good to see that the pandemic didn't stop the world, and that we were able to continue to push some of these initiatives forward. And for you, Elvis, we have a question and an appreciation for the GAP program that, it is pioneering. And one of the questions that has come through, and also something that you might want to talk about is, the apparel industry has been a leader globally in so many different areas. But to what extent do you think that the role of wages plays in empowering the women? And is that just a single focus, or can you give us the balance of sort of the holistic program versus where the wages factor into that?
Right. So, first, let me start by saying that we know that 80% of the workers in the apparel supply chain are women. So yet it faces high tariffs in many countries, including the US. Reducing these tariffs, such as through programs like GSP, would be a powerful tool to support women's empowerment in the apparel sector. Reducing tariffs on trade would allow us to invest the savings in our supply chain and expand programs like P.A.C.E. So second, governments could support more of the nonprofit partners we work with on P.A.C.E. so that they're able to impact women globally. We work very closely with partners, with multi-stakeholders, including governments, nonprofits, and other companies to scale the program to multiple sectors and industries. So building on that momentum and success of P.A.C.E., we are also joining forces with Business for Social Responsibility, ILO, Better Work, and CARE to launch Empower at Work. The shared action platform leverages its knowledge, skills, and network to drive collective action to benefit women workers and gender equity in global supply chains. Empower at Work will also focus on building and deploying sustainable, systemic, and scalable programs that promote gender equity in global supply chains as well. So to give you, and I'm going back to the part about the wages, we continue to kind of emphasize the fact that in addition to the wages, obviously the wages are being closely monitored by our supply sustainability teams and to ensure the working conditions and so forth. But it's also important for the women to understand the power of savings and compounding interest and so forth. So no matter how much money one makes, it won't help with personal advancement if the basic behavioral pattern is not understood on how they want to save for the future goals and so forth. So we are trying to kind of bring that balance on how they set their aspirations and how they bring the money to work for them in that through the knowledge of the program. And we also agree that all workers should be paid fairly for the work and treated with dignity. So.
Thank you. That's a great question. And, the fact that you have the majority of the workers in the apparel factories are actually women. And then you look at, for example, at the U.S. trade policy and our own harmonized tariff schedule. And we talked about this last time, just to reiterate it. If you look at the tariffs that are applied to women's clothing, for example, a women's outerwear anorak is tariffed at 14%. A men's outerwear anorak, same type, tariffed at 8.5%. So we even have discrimination within our own tariff system. So I think we also need to look at home before we start looking at others, but hopefully we will be able to do that. And just quickly before we go, I would like to run through and take a poll from each of you. If you can tell us, what are some, you all are taking actions, but what are individuals like me, Nicole, what is something that I can do that's going to help, that might encourage women to participate in the greater trade area? And so Mei, let's start with you, please.
I think awareness is so important to give awareness of this whole idea that women, in order for all of us to feel our being able to be recognized, we have to give more women around other countries also names and recognitions and let their stories speak for themselves. I feel that's what I'm trying to do. And by opening our purse to support them, it's the best way. Every consumer has that power to use our purse to really throw support where no one has really done so for a long time. So that's the easiest direct way that you can do something for them.
Great, thank you. And what about you, Beth? What is an action item that we can do?
Sure. So I would say commit to advocating for committing resources to gender analysis. So women are often shut out of global supply chains because of gender blind approaches. So no matter where you sit, you can be confident that gender analysis will reveal barriers to women's participation in trade so that they can be effectively addressed.
Great, thank you. And Livia, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would echo Beth's comments that gender analysis is really critical. One of the challenges in our work is not having great data. And I would also add making sure that women are at the table and women are participating at the table. And that goes across the board. For the men, For the men listening in, and when you're doing a panel, don't sit on a panel that only has other men. Make sure that women are represented, make sure that minorities are represented, make sure that there's other voices in the room.
Great, thank you. And Elvis, what is your action item for us?
Sure. I just want to also share a quick highlight recently that happened in the program. So we recently had elections in the country in one of the states for the local body, which is the Gram Panchayat, and that's most of you would understand that India democratic system. In the Gram Panchayat elections, we actually saw about 167 P.A.C.E graduates getting elected. 17 of them ended up becoming the heads of the Gram Panchayat. So there is power as this program goes to the ground on how they can get into positions and places when they get the right nudge. So going back to the point, I think individuals are part of the WITA community are unique in their roles to able to influence trade policy. So I would appeal to them that there should be a bigger focus on the barriers to trade that women face, and particularly in industries that predominantly employ women like apparel. So as we noted, 80% of the workers in apparel supply chains are women. Trade is critical for their livelihood. So reducing barriers to apparel trade would help them. In GAP, GAP's American workforce is also dominated by women. 76% of our US workers are women, and 56% are diverse. Our CEO is a woman. So the majority of our senior leadership are women, and half of our board of directors are women. So another separate idea would be to help connect women at the base of the pyramid to digitization, to open up new opportunities for women to participate in trade, thereby reducing the cost of participating. So those are two ideas I would say.
Great, thank you. This has been, for me, just amazing to see what each of you are doing in your roles. I have a great envy of what you're doing and great appreciation for it. So I want to thank you for sharing with us the actionable items where you're taking meaningful action to try to end these barriers to trade. And I hope that everyone who's listened has taken something away from this. So Ken, I turn it back to you.
Thanks so much, Nicole. Really appreciate all of you. Thank you so very much for joining us. This was a great conversation, a great sequel to the first event we had last week. Super important discussion. Livia, you are correct. Trade is not gender neutral inherently. And we hope to dive much deeper into many of these issues in our worker-centric and inclusive trade series. We also, just to be assured, we try to have balanced and diverse panels at WITA, never all male panels, as much as we can do that. I don't think any of our webinars have been, unless it's been like a one-on-one interview. So thank you for that reminder. And also—
You've done a great job at that, Ken. Others not so much this time around.
Thank you. It is a top of mind priority, trust me. We have another diverse panel coming next week, and April 8th, an all-star panel discussing the fundamentals of international trade and who should benefit from those policies. So I think we'll probably get into some of these issues again in our series. Thank you all very much. Sorry for keeping you a few minutes late. Be well, everybody, stay safe, and make sure you get the shot when you are eligible and it is accessible for you.